Change begins from within. As easy as it is to look outside of ourselves and want the world to change, the truth is, it never will if we remain the same. This podcast was created for changemakers like you who want more love and connection in your community. Today, you are going to hear stories that will inspire you and also challenge you to be the change. We are going to go deep, my friend. So take a deep breath and settle in. My name is Emilia Tamburini. Welcome to the Circle of Change. In a world where there is a lot to be serious about and where many of us have a tendency to take ourselves seriously, myself included in that, it's nice to know that there are places that you can go to let it all out, to let whatever it means to be human fly. One of the many movies I watched over the holidays was The Family Stone. Thank you so much, Joy, for bringing that movie to my life. At some point, Luke Wilson, the super chill brother, says to Sarah Jessica Parker, whose character is wound up so tight, "Here's the thing, Meredith, you have a freak flag. You just don't fly it." Oh man. Isn't that true of many of us? We have our traumas and our thoughts and our ways of being, and collectively, all of this creates our unique, beautiful selves. But most of our quirks pile up under these guises of, I must look good, or I'm not good enough how I am, or people aren't going to like me if I fly my freak flag. And we hole up and we hold in our true natures. In this winter season, part of the process is taking inventory of all of our resources. That includes those personality or deep soul gifts that you have that you're not offering to the world. So as you sit in circle with us today, let those bubble up and become known to you. Because the thing is, when we let ourselves be silly, to not be so critical, we are healing not only ourselves, but everyone else who gets to experience us. That's why I'm so delighted to bring you these two change makers, Lizzie Allan and Brett Macdonald, who are committed to using their comedic and improvisation gifts and passions to help people to heal and live their very best lives. Together, we talk about their stories, which are beautiful examples that you can do and create anything you want to in this lifetime. We talk about the essential role that humor and laughter play in self-development and healing. We talk about the comfort zone and how part of life and living life is stretching that. We talk about why connection and sharing with others helps us to heal in profound ways that you could not access by yourselves. And they leave you with two frameworks to help you bring light to the darkness. This circle is jam-packed with some amazing quotes and stories that you'll want to take into your life and may just leave you with an urge to sign up for some improv or comedy workshops. And I hope you do that. Let me introduce you to these two gems. Lizzie Allan is a registered therapeutic counselor, a professional stand-up comedian with a degree in comedy writing and performance, and a comedy therapist. Lizzie successfully combines therapy with stand-up comedy and is the creator of Hilarapy, her own unique brand of therapeutic comedy. Brett Mcdonald is passionate about bringing people together. She's an educator and workshop facilitator. Her work, rooted in improv, brings teams together to connect, collaborate, and drive workplace performance. Working with social impact organizations, Brett leads corporate team building, uniting employees and executives alike, all with an improv mindset, an approach that is proven to boost creativity, communication, and collaboration. Brett holds a Bachelor of Education, a diploma in theater, and is trained in Harvard's Project Zero visibility thinking routines, inquiry-based learning, differentiated learning, as well as self-compassion and mindfulness. She has taught internationally and facilitated professional workshops for the Association of German International Schools and the Educational Collaborative for International Schools. She has been training, performing, and teaching improv for over a decade, co-founding 2 improv groups, organizing shows, directing festivals, and performing herself. Most important to Brett is sharing the improv approach and allowing others to experience the value of connection. Both Lizzie and Brett are residing in British Columbia. Let's begin. Lizzie and Brett, welcome to the Circle of Change.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
I am delighted that you're both here. I connected with both Lizzie and Brett earlier this year. And I don't know if both of you know this, but it was shortly after I literally proclaimed to the universe that I wanted more fun and joy and laughter in my life. And it was literally within a 2-week span that I randomly met both of you. So I love that because it reminds me that the universe is always listening and supporting.
Yes.
Glad to hear it.
Oh, gosh. And since then, Brett, I mean, you and I have already collaborated on a one-day workshop that combined connecting conversation with play and improvisation. And I have to say, it was the most fun I've ever had at something that I've run. So thank you for that collaboration. It was so cool to see the women step out of their personas and really transform their stories. So that collaboration has been a real gift for me.
Mm-hmm. That was a really special day. And yeah, I think one of the first real true collaborations I've done where it just all fell into place. And it was so special and magical to be there with you and also to watch the women shine as well.
Yeah. And Lizzie, we haven't collaborated officially yet. And yet we had a super meaningful and powerful conversation. From that, I gathered that we are somehow kindred spirits, really supporting people in this world of healing and doing it differently. Just so was attracted to your presence, your energy, and what you're up to in the world.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about this evolution and how we can all contribute to it in our own unique and original ways. And yeah, it was great to meet you and have that lovely conversation. And I'm glad to be here so that we can open up, the stories and the conversation further around humor and healing.
Beautiful. Yeah, so let's do that. I like to start my circles with a poem. And the poem I'm going to read today is by Vince Gauman. Not sure if either of you know him. He's in Vancouver, and he's also a healer who is immersed in play and somatic experiences and focuses a lot on trauma in childhood in particular. But I feel like he's a kindred spirit that's with us here today. He's the author of the book, Let the Fire Burn, Nurturing the Creative Spirit of Children, a children's book for adults, which I love. And this book that I have, Wild Empty Spaces, Poems for Opening the Heart. This poem is Compassionate Restraint. Stay still, non-ambitious for a while, listening for something that longs to find you in your heartbreak and rare moment of pause. This is not a time to push as you have, to travel familiar routes. This is a time to be graced by a light only found in the still point of darkness, by subtle words only heard in pause. When you no longer have eyes for the next trail and every step leads to further stumble, the shackles of submission tightening with each struggle, holding you in compassionate restraint. Alas, this is the moment for your deepest exhale, one you have been waiting for, a moment when the skies are clear and dark enough for you to finally see the stars.
I like that.
Yeah, I love that idea of taking pause and noticing. That's a big one that I speak about a lot. So, and compassion.
Yeah. Anything else come up for you, Lizzie, with that?
It reminds me of the Tao, that we do without doing and everything gets done. It's that idea that we're kind of taught to reach for things and strive for things and work hard for things, but it's in the letting go and the surrender into the kind of the deep part of who we are, which is not concerned with any earthly things, I guess. The things, the precious things of the shop, that kind of thing, it's in that deeper part of us that the knowing gets to make itself known to us. And then, the doing becomes automatically or automatic and easy. That's kind of what that brings up for me.
Beautiful. When I came across it, I thought about the two of you in that it speaks a lot to finding the light in the darkness. I sense the work of the two of you is bringing light to the darkness, which I don't know which direction this relationship goes, but it's interrelated. Yeah, that's what struck me about it. But I do love it. The first question I ask all my guests on Circle of Change is, who are you? I personally love this question because I feel like there's an opening in it to take it wherever you want it to go. We know a little bit about the work that you do in the world, and feel free to improvise and go where you want to go. So, who are you?
I am a daughter of parents who fight for change and for what they believe in. I am a partner to a very kind-hearted and thoughtful German. I am a sensitive and emotional overthinker. I am also a loud laugher and proud of it in my adulthood. I'm a world traveler. I am an observer and a listener, and I am a lifelong learner. That's who I am.
I'm going to riff with this because I haven't prepared anything. I am somebody who wants to live a God-centered life. And by the word God, I mean connecting to the source of who I am and allowing that to power my earthly experience. So I am somebody who is learning to let go and learning to surrender and learning to not identify fully with my ego, and somebody who's wants to be a part of and be of service to the whole. The end.
Somehow I doubt it's the end. Maybe.
the end of that riff.
Of that riff. Yes.
Be continued.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I personally spend a lot of time listening to people's stories, how they got to where they got to in this moment right now, or what their perception of that is, that journey. I find comfort in that I always learn something about myself in the sharing, in the listening of story. And so I want to offer that to the listener today in hearing your stories around how you arrived at where you are today, either doing the work that you're doing or how you conceptualize yourself in this world right now.
I'm a person in long-term recovery. For me, that means I haven't had a drink or a drug in nearly 12 years. And I have come from a family who had, like all families, undealt with trauma and loss coming down the family line, as we all do. I think that's the sort of nature of being alive. You cannot escape trauma in some form or another, and the way it affects us and lands on us as we're growing. I grew up around people who were struggling a lot with mental health issues, drug addiction, alcoholism, and trying to kind of find their way in the world. I kind of landed into my teenage years with a feeling that I was different. I don't think I'm that different from everyone else, in that we feel different when we have to try to be the same as everyone else. And I think that's what happens when we kind of get pushed through these institutions. Well, in England, we have to wear uniforms, and and it was all kind of like I went from being a tomboy, a wild kind of tomboy, to having to wear a skirt and believed I had to be like all the other girls and grow my hair long and wear makeup and it was really challenging for me. And my natural response was to turn to alcohol and drugs. And that kind of gave me a sense of connection and safety and control over my reality, and brought a bit of color into this kind of gray world that I found myself in as a kind of worried teenager or an anxious teenager. I don't really know, but I learned really quickly to pretend I was confident, to pretend I was popular. I was in many ways those things, but underneath I was being driven by fear. My consequences to alcohol and drugs were very swift. And by the time I was 19, I was in a psychiatric ward, with experiences of drug-induced psychosis and delusions of grandeur and whatever. But at the same time, it was an enormous spiritual awakening. And I think there's two sides to every experience. There's the side that gets pushed through the lens of a Western model, and then there's a kind of opening experience that happens that is more understood by, culturally understood, I guess, by different tribal type experiences. I'm just going to quickly shoehorn this in because it's quite a big part of my story. I got a lot of information when I went mad. And I say I went mad because I did absolutely go mad. And the way you know you've gone mad is that you don't know you're mad at the time. That's true madness. Everyone else is mad and you're completely sane. And I think there's kind of some truth to that experience as well, because we live in such a kind of psychosis of a society. There's so many conflicting and crazy ideas and views and all sorts popping out all over the place. Then anyway, I could go on for hours about that, but I've kind of gone off piste, I think, maybe a bit with this. What was the question?
How did you arrive at where you are today? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can fast forward to that. So yeah, coming out of hospital and coming back to this dimension of sanity and being able to fit back in, which is really what the psychiatric system needed me to do, was be able to know when to say things and not to say things. And that's, I didn't stop thinking them. I just knew that there was a filter and I had to have it. So I tried for another 10 years to be normal. And eventually I had to quit substances altogether. And so when I was 29, I got into recovery. And 2 years later, I was at university. And 5 years into my recovery, I was performing my story through stand-up. And I was doing a research project because my university course was comedy writing and performance degree. I wanted to know if I could use comedy as a therapy tool to smash the stigma and shame surrounding addiction and mental health issues. So I did this show and I wrote about it, and I interviewed people who had experienced it. But the show caught the attention of a psychiatrist who worked at the hospital that I had been sectioned at 10 years previous. And he passed it on and asked, would I come and perform it for their clients? Because the position that I was performing was from a place of wellness. So I was telling my story from a place of wellness rather than somebody who was still undergoing those experiences. And I created a safe space and a healthy environment, alcohol-free environment, to perform this comedy in. And it snowballed and carried on. After university, I got a job working for a charity, and then I began to teach people in recovery how to tell their stories about addiction and things like that. And it just seemed to take on a life of its own. And then I trained as a therapist, and I added these extra dimensions into the work that I do. And so that's how I came to combine therapeutic processes with comedy. And a lot of people just use the comedy as the therapy, and in and of itself, it's wonderful. But I wanted to kind of bring in a deeper level of healing that could allow for both the crying and the vulnerability and the openness of kind of talking about that really deep stuff, and have it live alongside the humor and the light and the joy. When my students come onto stage and they're talking about some of the difficulties that they live with, like social anxiety or depression or whatever it is, the shame that they carry just being alive, whatever it is, we can talk about that stuff. There's room for that in comedy by being serious and then making some laughter occur. But you don't have to belittle the experience. You know, you don't have to put yourself down. So it's kind of, I wanted to take comedy to another space. I wanted to elevate the experience that both the performer and the audience were having. I wanted to allow for more dimensions in there and not just have it be a laugh a minute. So yeah, that's how I came to do. I know I went on a bit, but that's how I came to kind of do what I do today.
I love that. Lizzie, I think what you're saying, stand-up comedy has always been something that I've struggled to watch because it's really hard to watch people stand on stage and just belittle themselves and put themselves down constantly. And so I love that you've taken it and made that a meaningful experience for people. I just think I can imagine the beauty of it and what you do with your clients too. It's because comedy can have such a powerful tool, like you said, but you have to be aware of what else is happening and naming that too. Yeah. And it's so lovely to hear your story. What you said, Amy about listening to people's stories, it made me go, oh, I'm a storyteller too. Some people would say I talk too much, but I like to think I'm a storyteller. So how I came to where I'm at, I grew up in a small town doing musical theater every summer. That was something that was a big passion of me. And I think it was a place where I could stand out. I was never one who felt cool or blended in, but that was somewhere I could shine as myself and take on other characters and have a great time. So I then eventually trained to become a teacher, and that took me overseas. And while I was living in Germany, I rediscovered improv, ended up co-founding a group with some friends. And it really was a process of just teaching ourselves the skills of improv and the games. And we all came from different areas of theater background. And so we all had all different things to bring and different ideas and experiences and opinions. As we learned and trained in improv, we would often come to our weekly sessions with stories of how we were noticing that it was seeping into our everyday lives, and it was seeping into how we were communicating at work and how we were reacting to situations in a more positive manner, able to sort of sit back and appreciate the moment more and use this yes and idea. When I moved back to Canada a few years later, I knew I didn't want to go back into full-time teaching. And I was working with a coach who one day said to me, Brett, every time you talk about improv, you light up and your passion comes out. And I was like, well, yeah, it's amazing what it can do for people, not just the performance aspect, but just the exercises that you do to train in these skills to be able to get on stage. And so she said to me, you need to do something with this. So that's how I landed where I am now. And what I try to do is bring a little bit opposite to you, Lizzie, in the way that it's not performance-based. I don't even necessarily do role playing, anything like that. What I do is I bring it back to the very basic skills that improvisers use in their training, how to be a good listener, how to tell a story, how to communicate, how to actively listen and have positive dialogue, and also be spontaneous and embrace failure. I use those games and exercises, which are word exercises, physical exercises, sounds, clapping, all that playful kid stuff, really. But I do it with adults. That's where I've landed. That's what brought me here.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to both of you. I love that the topic of that theme of degradation or self-degradation in humor came up, Lizzie. So thanks for bringing that to light. And as you were speaking about it, I thought, oh, that's part of our collective trauma in some way, in that we've created this world of not being good enough. And so somehow our humor is also very much tied to that, perpetuating that story almost. And yet there's some form of relief around it, but I wonder, is there really a feeling of relief in that sort of humor versus the type of humor that you're speaking of and creating and bringing to the world of comedy, which is a beautiful thing. Brett, the whole concept of having the work that you do, these principles that come out in improv and have those seep into your life and shape it is also a beautiful thing. And in my one little experience in improv, I did a training a couple years ago in Victoria. I found the same thing, like the principle of yes and. I was like, oh my gosh, like everybody needs to know this. We would have such different conversations and we'd create so differently if we really embraced those principles. So I'm really stoked. Just I'm so pleased, and it warms my heart that both of you are using your gifts, what lights you up, what has healed yourself, and sharing that with the rest of the world. I am curious in terms of this relationship between humor and play and improv and healing or self-development or growth. And I think both of you work in those worlds. In your mind, what is it about humor and play that supports healing and self-development, or however you want to word it?
In what I do, it's the experience of going into a self-awareness and a self-reflection. So as we're doing these silly games, counting and clapping, we're constantly checking in with ourselves. What's happening in my body? What am I noticing? How do I see this pattern of what I'm doing right now in this game in my own life outside of this room? When do I notice that I respond in this same way? So there's this idea of learning things about yourself that you may be already aware of, but maybe not acknowledging, or you're learning new things, but being able to play with it and experience it in a safe, fun area, and making that connection so that when you leave the room, perhaps you can build a new pattern for yourself in situations. So I think for me, it's a lot of, yeah, self-reflection and learning about yourself while doing play. And I think the other part of it is the laughter aspect. When you're in a situation where you're playing a game and there's high stakes of counting to 3 and getting your clap, your stamp, and your shimmy at the right time, and you suddenly fail, there's this moment of where you feel like you're on the top of the world, and then you lose it. But in a split second, you realize that what all you've lost is that you shimmied at the wrong time. And this release of laughter that can come out of that, I think in itself can be so healing. I think letting ourselves let out those like deep belly laughs and letting that emotion out that way is, for me at least, I find that a very healing part of the healing process as well.
I definitely agree with that. And I also would like to add the kind of phenomenon of laughter. It's something that's almost beyond our scope of understanding. Like, why do we laugh? And there's something really powerful about laughing together. And the piece that really is big for me in the work that I do is the connection and the belonging and the sense of kind of dropping of the masks that we wear and the roles that we have. And when we're silly, we get back into our bodies. And, I definitely use improv games and stuff in the work that I do. And it's really important and fun. We take life so seriously. We live in this fear-based reality, which is constantly pumping out this bad news all the time. And people are kind of constantly reaffirming that in our collective minds about how difficult life is and how worried we should be and how afraid we should be and all of these things. And kind of getting back into a room with a group of people and looking into each other's eyes and laughing together is shaking off all that tension that we build up through our day-to-day serious kind of trying to be grown-ups, and that play is so important for children, and it is so important for our inner children, our inner child, because this concept of being an adult is that it's a concept, and some of us have taken it far too far, and and trying to adult in a really serious way, and having a space and a permission to let go and just be who we really are, joyful spiritual beings, light beings. It's just reconnecting to different parts of ourselves. It's so healing.
I so appreciate what you just shared there, Lizzie, as being somebody who has a tendency to take herself too seriously and live a very serious life and be harsh and critical. That's one reason why I called the two of you into my life, because I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And that was a promise to myself when I came out of the cancer experience. And I knew that that experience was here for me to bring more love and joy into my life. And I knew like my body, my soul needed that on a deeper level that I couldn't comprehend or understand. And when I was still taking life too seriously after the fact, I thought, no, there needs to be, there has to be a different way, a better way. And although all that sounds very much like I'm judging my life, I don't mean better, just a different way of being that feels better. What both of you said, I think about these beautiful spiritual teachers who have come into my life, like the Dalai Lama and his deep, resonant laugh, or Maya Angelou and her laugh that really just made your heart sing when you heard it, or some of the indigenous elders that I've worked with who bring humor into topics that are very hard and are so rooted in trauma, and that humor is there, and I think they understand and know that it's a necessary component of healing and connecting to something deeper. So very, very cool. I love it. I imagine when you're working with people, there's this, well, there's a comfort zone, right? That people like to stay within. We're very good with being comfortable. And yet on the other side of the comfort zone, there's so much change and possibility and a new future that one can't even imagine. When I think about the world, I don't think there's like a ton of people lining up to get into theater or comedy and public speaking and all of that. Like that feels to me like it really brings people up against that edge of their comfort zone. I'm curious, from your perspective, is there a relationship, or what is the relationship between our comfort zones and really getting the best out of our life, or following our dreams, or however you'd like to word it, and really relating that to what you get to see and experience with the people you get to work with?
Well, I always say that life happens outside of our comfort zones. People often don't really think about is that our comfort zones aren't necessarily comfortable. It's just that our own shit is warm. And that's the saying my friend says, and I just think it's brilliant because, you know, we like the comfort of our own shit, really. And I know that sounds like a horrible thing, but the truth is when we step out of our comfort zone, we're basically going into a territory that we haven't before explored. And that's really all it is. And it's not necessarily difficult. It's the fear that it might be. It's the fear that we might fail or we might lose everything. But in that emptiness, in that kind of stepping out into the void, is also our greatest potential and our limitless capabilities. They all live in that kind of void. You know, I mean, standing on the edge of a cliff, am I going to jump off? And yeah, I might fail. Yes, I might land splat on my face. Nothing. But the truth is, everything I've ever done that's changed my life, whether it's been something that's been really challenging or something that I've had to kind of overcome, like getting on stage, because I've had terrible times on stage. I've had terrible ego backlash, is what I call it, where I've gone home and absolutely hated myself and rejected myself because I was being called into something, to do something. But what I was coming up against was old trauma and fear of rejection. And, you know, and it wasn't just stage fright I was dealing with. I was dealing with kind of, you know, will I be ousted from society completely? I mean, that was the, you know, there's the old fear, but I wasn't tracing it back. And, you know, and having done a lot of work on the trauma of my past and the family trauma and what have you, I really stepped out of some of those comfort zones, and seeing people that I work with do the same thing is phenomenal. I can watch somebody else and I can see greatness in them, and I can see them come up against their edge and choose to go back and stay small. Or I've seen people jump out and make an effort. Whether they've seen it or not, I've seen how beautiful and brilliant and magical that has been. Whether they've gone and lashed themselves with their own ego is, by the by. But I think I'm waffling. I'm going to stop now. Over to you, Brett.
Well, thank you, Lizzie. Oh, Lizzie, it's great. What you just said just brought so much up for me. One thing I just realized about myself from what you just said is that I am such a cheerleader for my friends when they say, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go become a mountain tour guide, or I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go work. And I'm always like, yes, you go. And I'm just so proud and I encourage them all the way. And then I flip around myself and I'm so scared to step outside of my comfort zone. And I think that's what I love about improv, is that it forces me to do that, but not in my real life. But I get to practice that skill and strengthen that muscle of embracing that fear. And that's the other thing you said, Lizzie. I completely agree that it's really, when it comes down to it, is this fear of the unknown. One of my favorite workshops that stuck with me, it was with a Colombian improviser named Daniel, who did Fear is Your Friend. That was the title of his improv workshop. And one of the exercises we did was imagining fear as our little friend on our shoulder. And, how, when you're about to step on stage or go and face a fear of some sort, how do you greet them? How do you harness that energy of fear into a positive energy that can drive you forward? And thinking about, why is fear there? It's a lot of, we're trying to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe as well. So how can we harness that into driving ourselves forward a little bit? And I also thought a little bit about comfort zones and how it's really different for everybody. And I wonder, the more you stretch that comfort zone idea, does it get wider and wider? My friend once said to me about running, she said it never gets easier, but you just get better at it, which is why it always feels hard, because you're getting better and better. And I wonder if it's the same with that comfort zone. We stretch it and it still feels scary, and we stretch it, but we're stretching it bit by bit. Yeah. Now I'm waffling. Back to you, Lizzie.
I really like that. And thanks for bringing that up, because the metaphor that I use is the more we step out of our comfort zone, we create a bigger space to live in, because we live in these little kind of bubbles that were prescribed to us by our families, by whatever it is that we kind of identify with. But the truth is that we can step outside of those things and explore that. And the work that we do, both of us, Brett, is it gives people, like you said, which was a great way of putting it, we get to practice it in a safe space. I think public speaking and all of those things are one of the most, fear-based things people can think to do. But actually, there's no real thing except for a bit of shame that you might feel at not getting it as perfect as you think you should. But the truth is, nobody really minds. If it wasn't that great, then people forget about it. And if it was, then great, exciting stuff. So it's that safe space that we provide. And once we kind of get used to kind of showing up around people, that can then be taken into our work life, where we get to maybe speak up for ourselves in the office or in our relationships, in our personal or family relationships that maybe aren't as, happy and conducive as we'd like them to be. So I'm waffling again, Brett. Can you hear me?
It's no problem, Lizzie. This is just what we do. Maybe this is part of our humor-based work, is that we like to waffle.
I like this word waffle. I think I might use it. Oh gosh, after what you both have shared, I want to stretch my arms out, because I just have this feeling of, the relief and the freedom and the fun that we could have if that edge was expanded, and the possibility within that space of just being able to be free to move. And yeah, feels amazing. The other thing that came up to me, and I don't know if you believe this is part of your work, but what I have noticed in other sorts of coaching or therapy groups I've been in is that power of being witnessed. Both of you work in these group settings where people are able to witness other people's vulnerability and stepping outside and, going past that edge. And I guess I'm just curious if you think about that, or if that's part of the theory of the work that you do, is that witnessing component.
The therapeutic work that I've done is correction through connection. And when we're in isolation, we're stuck with our own thoughts. And somebody once said, which I thought was brilliant, never go into the neighborhood of your own mind alone. Because when it's just us with our thinking, and there's so much isolation, we're really cut off from our kind of tribal roots. And people will spend a lot of time just bouncing quite negative thoughts around in their own mind. And so when we get into a group situation and we open that up, whether in a comedy way or even in just some of the more vulnerable connecting pieces that I like to do before and during that work, we get real time responses through eye connection and, and the kind of shared identification. When somebody's saying, well, I feel really ashamed of myself, or I feel really alone, you get that beautiful moment of eye contact. The room drops, everybody gets into their heart spaces, and there becomes that kind of flow between us that you can only get when you're around other people. You can't fake it. You can't think it through and intellectualize that kind of experience. You have to be in connection with other people. And it's incredibly healing to share that shame-based, fear-based thinking and get that reassurance that you're not the only one doing it. And you can see from the other person, when you hear your story from another person's mouth, you get to look at them, and we always see each other as innocent. We can, when we get to that vulnerability, allows us to see each other as innocent. And then we get to see ourselves as innocent. And that can be a real penny drop moment for many people to go, oh, yeah, no, I'm giving myself too much of a hard time around this stuff. And it doesn't have to be that way. And that group experience is paramount to that kind of breakthrough.
I hadn't thought of it as being witnessed. I like that idea, Emilia. For me, I think it comes to kind of what Lizzie's just touched on, is this group connection. I always say my ideal group size is 8 to 12 people, because I find within that group size, you can find it's intimate enough that people can build these really neat, vulnerable relationships with each other within, 30 minutes. But it's a big enough group that you get to experience and hear all these different stories of other people and learn from them as well. So I think a big part of it is the connection aspect of it. What you said, Lizzie, I think you can only learn so much being in your own mind neighborhood by yourself, but being around other people, connecting to them, that's where growth can happen and learning, I think, as well. So it's more about being part of the group and feeling that connection versus necessarily the witnessing aspect of it, I think, for me. Yeah, I always feel like give myself a little high five when it's a break time during one of my workshops and everyone just heads off and starts having conversations about hobbies and neighborhoods and these things where they grew up and this. And I think, yes, you didn't know each other before and look how close you've already become. Check.
I love it. I love it. And for me, it relates so much to the circle work that I do and the magic that I get to see all the time between people of different cultures, different upbringings, different whatever it is. And as people start to share their stories, they're like, oh, actually, we're pretty similar in terms of the pains that we experience and the joys that we celebrate and all of those things. And it's amazing, not only for the personal healing, but the collective healing that can get done in those situations. So thank you so much for touching on the connection piece. In the people I'm speaking with a lot these days, the topic of resiliency comes up quite a bit, in that there's the reality of the world that we're living in right now. And as we're recording this, we're still very much immersed in the pandemic. Here on the West Coast of Canada, we're about to go into another epic rain and water event, which is going to devastate a lot more communities again. There's this sense of okay, how much am I supposed to bear? How much can I bear? And a lot of people are suffering right now and really having a hard time seeing the light in the darkness. And so I'm curious for that person who might be listening right now or might have this episode shared with them. What is a piece of wisdom, some words, or maybe even an activity, something that you want to share with them that might help them to see some light, feel some release?
Oh, that's a big question now that I'm thinking about the people who have had their communities devastated. It still for me always comes back to having an awareness and a taking a moment to notice and be curious about what's happening. A little exercise that just came to mind that's a very simple one and sort of part of an exercise is to be looking at the things around you. It could be those of us that are lucky enough to have homes around us still that are not devastated, but taking a moment to notice and name and thank the things you have in your life, whether it's a person or it's a home or it's a job or a relationship, just having a moment. So a very simple exercise is walking in the space you're in, noticing things. Hello, tree, and thanking it. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for holding our soil together. So naming the things that are around you and thanking them. And I think that brings you into noticing, taking a moment to take a breath, and also being curious. Why do I have this? Why is this important in my life right now? And how can I be grateful for it?
One of the stories that I like to listen to, or at least get the wisdom from, is the story, I think it's of the Yugoslavian farmer who was going through, a quick version of this story would be that this storm happened and his paddock broke and the horses got out. And the neighbor came over and said, "Oh, that's terrible, terrible." And the farmer just kind of went, "Well, who knows if it's good or bad?" And then the horses came back with 4 wild horses. And then he had more horses. And the farmer came over and said, "Well, that's great, isn't it? You've got all those horses. What a blessing." And the farmer said, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" And then his son got in the paddock to train to break the horses in, and he broke his leg. And the farmer came over, "Oh, that's terrible. You've got nobody to work the fields now." And the farmer said, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" And then they came in to draft up the young people to go to fight the war. And the son couldn't go because he had a broken leg, and the neighbor came over and said, "Oh, that's great, isn't it? You get to keep your son." And he goes, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" And I think we go through these traumas, we go through these collective disasters, and sometimes it affects us personally, sometimes it affects our communities, or it's affecting Africa or those places where we can kind of find it easier to turn a blind eye to. But the point is we're all going to have to experience these terrible things. We're going to lose loved ones, we're going to get sick, we're going to get old, we might die young. All of these things happen to us. Who knows if it's good or bad? And I think just kind of stepping back a little bit and not putting so much value judgments onto every single experience that happens, and kind of hammering things into sort of disaster zones and all of those things, because there's beauty that is able to arise out of the cracks that are caused by difficulties and challenges. And it reminds me just of this one quote: "Make sure you're not suffering over your suffering." Our suffering is to undergo. The original meaning of the word suffering is to undergo. So we will have to undergo some of these challenging things. And these storms that are coming in have devastated local communities already. And, that's having knock-on effects to all of us. But the suffering that occurs, we have to undergo it. And we do that, we come closer together, we help one another. The human spirit is, emboldened and enlivened by all of this. So I know it's easy for me to say, isn't it? Sitting in my nice warm home, my feet aren't drenched with water and stuff. And, it's, I'm waffling, Brett, help me.
You got this, Lizzie. You're doing great.
No, I think both of you, have been profound in the wisdom that you've just shared. And I don't know if it's about being happy and joyous and grateful in the moment. Like sometimes that's just not attainable. And it doesn't need to be a lifelong suffering. There's a coming out of it, or a just finding those touch points, those touchstones that can shed a little bit of light, even in the darkness and in in those traumatic moments. I'm so grateful to both of you. I'm going to end with one last question and then bring this conversation and circle to a close. This podcast is ultimately about helping people to be the change that the world is asking for right now. Lizzie, you spoke about, the transition that we're going through, or this transformation process that the world is in right now. My goal is really to support people in that, in coming inward, to be able to step outward in new ways. That's one thing that it means to me. And I think it means different things to different people. So the final question for our circle together is, what does being the change mean to you?
For me, it really just looks like modeling what I want to see in the world myself. I think we can do a lot of complaining. Why aren't people more like this? Why are people not kind? Why aren't they listening to each other? And it's flipping that back on myself. Am I modeling that? Am I being kind and listening? So for me, it's really about modeling what I want to see in others, for kids and adults across the board.
I use this analogy because I really like what you said, Brett. And I think we have to be really careful about preaching too much to other people and kind of getting into that role of telling people how they should behave and, pulling people up and criticizing the way that other people are living life, because we get afraid, don't we? So I liken it to a bit of, a revolution of the human heart, and that I need only concentrate on my own inner experience and lean into how I can get closer to my higher self, how I can get more in touch with that part of me that knows how to respond to life and to the moment by moment experience of being human. It's more showing up for myself. And like you said, that models what I want to be around. And naturally, I'm going to orient myself towards people who have the same kind of energetic, heart-opening experience. And that's what I want. I want to be surrounded by people who love and respect me for who and what I am and what I stand for. And yes, I'm waffling again, Brett and Amy Lee.
I don't hear any waffling. I just hear pure wisdom and just such beautiful tidbits. And I know the listener is just going to be full of lots of things to think about after this discussion. But more than that, ways to be and show up. And also, I have heard a lot of compassion in the stories that you've both told, in that there is this deep self-acceptance of all the weirdness of being human, and that we're okay. And if we can create these safe, beautiful, connecting spaces for that weirdness to be there, and it be okay, that in and of itself is healing. And I think both of you are masters at doing that in your work. And so thank you so much for joining me here and the listener in Circle of Change. We will put all of your info into the show notes so people can find you and follow you and work with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
Thank you for having.
You can speak for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me and both of us.
I'm now passing the talking piece to you. If you feel called to put your voice in the circle, please head to humconsulting.ca/podcast and share your story there. I cannot wait to hear what has come up for you as you have listened to what has been shared here today. I wish you love and joy beyond your wildest imagination. Thank you so much for being here in the Circle of Change. I also want to express my gratitude to the following peeps. Circle of Change is recorded on Lekwungen territories, and I am so grateful to live on this land. Our opening and closing music was created by the talented E-Roll Beats. You can find his creations at erollbeats.com. And special thanks to my coach, Mary Chan of Organized Sound Productions, for bringing this podcast to life. Until next time, ciao.